Sabrina Salvati. Doobie-doobie-doo. 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 I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. Doobie-doobie-doo. Hello. Happy Friday, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Sabby Sabs podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. I want to give a big shout out to everyone watching on Rockfin, YouTube, and Twitter as well. I have a special guest with me tonight. His name is Algier Hawkins. He's a member of the Socialist Alternative, and he's worked with Kshama Sawant's campaign. Hi, Algier.
Hello, how are you? Thank you for having me.
I'm doing good. I'm glad it's Friday.
Right on. Yes, indeed.
So, I want to start off with, can you tell everybody a little bit about your background and like how you got involved with Socialist Alternative?
Yes, I've been a member for 26 years. I joined at the age of 21, and I became politically active at the age of 18 when I was in college around issues around Central Africa, particularly the Congo, which at that time in 1995 was called Zaire, and it was underneath a military dictatorship, Mobutu Sese Seko. And I was listening to Malcolm, and Malcolm was talking about the Congo back in 1964, 65. And Malcolm's my political hero. And so if Malcolm was talking about it in 65, certainly I want to talk about it in 1995. And unfortunately, it was still going on at that time. So that's what kind of got me politically engaged. It was international struggles. I met SA, which at that time was called Labor Militant, back in 1995. And we were a small organization. This is pre-Kshama Sawant victory in 2013. But we are a national organization that believes in the ideas of socialism, class struggle, solidarity. And we believe that we need a transformation of the world where the resources are put in the hands of ordinary working people and the poor and the oppressed, not just in the United States, but around the world.
I co-sign all of that. I'll tell you, I co-sign all of that. So I want to start with that story. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen to show everybody really quick what we're going to talk about tonight. All right, here we go. So share. All right, everyone. So tonight we are talking about Kshama Sawant recall. Don Lemon is blaming leftists. Surprise, surprise. And India Walton loses. I want to get into that. I've been doing a lot of research about that story, and Algier is here to talk about these issues as well with me. So I actually want to go ahead and get started with the Kshama Sawant recall. Before we get into the recall, I want to show everybody just a little bit about her in case you're not familiar with Kshama Sawant. So I'm going to share my screen. So Kshama Sawant, she's not a career politician. She's an activist who brings a passion for social justice to her work as a public servant. She's a member of the city council, and Kshama pledges to be a voice for workers, youth, the oppressed, and the voiceless. She only accepts the average worker's wage and donates the rest of her six-figure salary to building social justice movements. And so I think that's really important. That's one of the reasons why I really like her. I'm incredibly impressed with her. And she's been doing great work in Seattle. And unfortunately, there is a recall going on with Kshama. And I want to get your take on that, Algier. Why is this recall happening to begin with?
I think just by the bio that you read out just briefly is the fact that Kshama sees herself not as a career politician. This is not career ladder building approach. This is about organizing, mobilizing, agitating for working people and what they need in her district throughout Seattle, throughout the state of Washington, and throughout the country. That in fact, corporate power has accumulated so much, not just wealth, but influence in the society that we needed not just one person, but we needed a movement, actually. We needed a movement to really accelerate the interests of ordinary working people that are not talked about, is not spoken about, and certainly is not spoken out within corporate media and mainstream media. So Kshama plays a very important role as a catalyst. So she certainly believes that if I'm in City Hall, I just don't only want to pack City Hall with supporters and people in the community, but I want to make sure I have 5,000 people outside City Hall to make sure that our voices are amplified. And so in many ways, I like to call Kshama sometimes the voice of the voiceless when it comes to certainly national politics and international politics as well.
Awesome. We have Brian, who has just joined us, who's also a part of Kshama Sawant's campaign. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Brian, can you give everybody just a brief bio about yourself?
Yeah, I'm on Socialist Alternatives National Committee. I was Kshama's campaign manager back in 2019, and that campaign was known for the fact that Amazon, at that time, Jeff Bezos was the richest man in the world, tried to buy City Hall in Seattle. And, usually the big multinationals, they don't weigh into local politics. They leave that to the big landlords, to the developers, et cetera. But we take it as an honor that we make these powerful enemies. And Amazon came in because they knew we were going to do exactly what we did, which was to build a working class movement to tax them, to deal with the affordable housing crisis that there is in Seattle and in every city around the country. And that's what we did. We beat them when they tried to buy the election. And then we built the movement that succeeded in taxing Amazon $2 billion, taking some of that wealth back that the billionaire class stole from us. We took it back from them to fund affordable housing.
Awesome. So we were just starting to talk about the recall that's going on. And I want to get your opinion about this. Why do you feel this is happening, Brian? And where can she go from here? Because this is the second recall I've heard about this year. Obviously, with Gavin Newsom in California, I didn't feel heartbroken over that one. just being real. But in your words, why do you think that this is happening?
Yeah, we've made powerful enemies, and the ruling class isn't stupid. They know what Marxist politics represent. They know what a class struggle movement building approach represents and how it's different than what a lot of the left Democrats put out there, which is the woke buzzwords, but they're not trying to build movements. They're not trying to anger the ruling class. And so you've got this where big business is trying to buy this election. And at the same time, you've got the right-wing element too. There's a right-wing backlash all across the country against the Black Lives Matter movement. There have been 81 bills introduced all across the country to criminalize the right to protest. What's going to appear on the ballot when voters get it in the mail here in Seattle? It's going to appear like Kshama led a bunch of riots to the mayor's house, language about outside agitators. It's the same type of racist right-wing lies that Fox News is putting out there all the time. And it's going to actually appear on the ballot. It's going to be the last thing that people see before they vote. So we've got that right-wing backlash against BLM. And also there's an attack on the right to vote that's happening throughout the country. So you've got this corporate element that's always been up against us, the big landlords, because we keep winning renters' rights victories. And now you've got a right-wing backlash that's attaching themselves to it too. 500 rich Republican donors, 130 Trump donors. I mean, we're talking Seattle. 130 Trump donors. Trump's biggest donor in Washington state has weighed in on this recall. I can tell you a lot about those folks, but I won't sidetrack us there. But yeah, we made enemies with big business, and now the right wing's laying in, attacking the right to protest, and then the right to vote. It's voter suppression by another name. The Republicans or the Dixiecrats back in the day, they never had a bill that said the Voter Suppression Act, right? They called it something else. What it's being called here is a winter special election, an election where people will get their ballot in the mail. It's all mail in here. People will get their ballot a few days before Thanksgiving, not at the time that everyone just voted in Seattle, just ended voting a few days ago. They'll get their ballot in the mail around November 20th, and then they have to vote by December 7th. So you get it right before Thanksgiving. Then you go on, and maybe have some folks over, maybe have a few drinks, have some turkey, so some tofurkey, whatever. And then you're expected to vote later. Well, our voters, folks that vote for Kshama, often vote late. It's something that we try and battle against with all our campaigns, but it's just a fact. It's young people, renters, oppressed people. The poorer someone is, the more likely they are to vote late. That's who votes for Kshama, right? There are rich areas in our district. The core, the center of our district, Capitol Hill and the central district, not so much. But then there's areas around the water. Those people vote early and they don't vote for us. And they're going to be highly motivated. So this special, it's not just the usual enemies we face, but it's this special election, which is another form of voter suppression, which means we're going to have to build the biggest get out the vote operation this city's ever seen.
Yeah, and I'm curious. I've never been to Seattle, but I know a lot of people who have been there or lived there or moved there. And I want to get your opinion about when it comes to the Democratic Party in Seattle. How does the Democratic Party do in Seattle? Do you feel that more people are in Seattle are more likely to be further to the left, or do you feel that it's more so more people are Democrat establishment voters?
Yeah, I think it's a similar situation to a lot of what's going on in the country. In Seattle, it is dark for a lot of people who come here that how much the housing crisis is just so stark, and the houselessness problem. Like if you look out my window right down the street, you can see RVs of people that are living on the street, like right outside my window. You walk 2 blocks that way, there's an RV park. Walk 8 blocks that way, there's a tent city, right? But there's a lot of that happening everywhere. And the COVID crisis and the obscene amount of wealth that the billionaires have hoarded during the COVID crisis have made this worse everywhere. There's 2 wings of the Democratic Party here. The Republicans don't often win elections, but it looks like they just actually won one in Seattle with a right-wing backlash against BLM by attacking a DSA endorsed candidate, right? But who usually runs things before Kshama got elected, there was mainly just one wing of the Democratic Party, and that was the corporate establishment wing. It was well established, the Seattle consensus, where big business would sit down with the politicians. They'd actually go on a retreat together in budget season, and big business would tell the politicians what they want, and it would be delivered. When Kshama came in, she said, no, I'm not going to that retreat. And we're going to establish a people's budget where we bring the movements into City Hall to see what people demand. Now, we don't win everything that we fight for in the people's budget, but we fight and we win some things, and they're afraid of both those things. They're afraid of the victories we've won, but also they're afraid of just the fight that we bring. In that situation, after Kshama got elected, you saw another wing of the Democratic Party emerge too in Seattle, a wing where union leaders, NGO activists, well-meaning progressives felt they could assert themselves more. And so therefore you had a progressive wing of the Democratic Party that was running people for city council and even for mayor. And this progressive wing, at one point it was seen as maybe even having a majority on the city council. But some of that was illusory. They're not dependable for working class people, for poor people, and for oppressed people. And I think largely because of that, we saw a turnout that disappointed a lot of people in last week in the general election, and the corporate wing asserted themselves. That the union endorsed candidates did not win overwhelmingly. One of them did, but most of them didn't. The DSA endorsed candidates did not win. The candidates endorsed who were bankrolled by Amazon, by the big landlords, etc. They're who won last week. So that shows there's more at stake this time around with Kshama. We need that voice there, so there's not a corporate takeover of City Hall. But I think it also shows us more generally across the country that if you're afraid to make enemies, if you think you can just legislate things through backroom deals and, some progressive support here or there, and you're not taking a class struggle approach, it's not just that it's not the best approach. It's that it leaves room for the right wing and the corporate establishment to reassert themselves. Because people say, what's the point? And people aren't going to say that with Kshama because they know what the point is. It's just that we need to overcome this voter suppression and need to overcome this right wing backlash.
Well said. Algia, I want to get your opinion about this as well.
Yeah. I definitely think the points that Brian raised is spot on. I think the rise, for example, of DSA or the rise of certain figures of the more recent period. Kshama played a very important role in that. It gave space to people, even within the Democratic Party and outside the Democratic Party, to begin to speak a different language, to run for, and we're going to talk about India Walton later on, but certainly Kshama's example within that also gave life to this idea that I'm a nurse, I can run for office, I want to speak in the name of people, I want to organize with people. That's a powerful difference. We are 10 years now into Occupy Wall Street. It was 10 years ago this year. And that began, I think, the beginning stages of what we're living through right now. This idea of the 1% against the 99%. As Marxists, we've always believed that there was a working class against a ruling class, a ruling elite. And certainly we always understood that from history. But I think for the everyday consciousness of everyday people, that became a important buzzword. And I think that's why it became so important for Kshama to win in 2013. Mind you, in 2012, we ran against the most powerful Democrat in the state house, Frank Chop. We garnered 20,000 votes, 20% of the vote. For us, people say, well, we lost, but we celebrated because we felt like that was the foundation to build a powerful movement that will highlight the need for working class politics, the need to challenge the Democratic Party, to really challenge this idea that we can't run as independents, and we can't build our own political party, that we would argue a workers' party. So the ground is there for that. The question is the development of leadership, the development of our social movements to see itself as independent from the interests of not just the Democratic Party, but from the ruling elite and their rules and their game that they play on a daily basis.
One of the things that Kshama Sawant has said, and this is I think one of her most popular quotes, is that the road for a progressive through the Democratic Party leads to a graveyard. And I want to get both of your, opinions about that. And when you think about like the squad, do you feel that maybe they should have ran as socialists or democratic socialists?
You want to go, Algier?
Sure. Well, if something's going to be born, a new instrument that's going to be born, most people will go through the thing that they believe or is perceived is the road to victory, right? The Democratic Party on a national level, we can go back to FDR, we can go back to the Civil Rights Movement. It is this idea that Democratic Party as a party is the party of the working class. It's the party of working people, of labor, of Black people, of women. And so the idea to run, I will run inside the Democratic Party. I will use that instrument as the vehicle. And certainly we have seen victories. I mean, as an example, we have probably the most diverse Congress in U.S. history, people of color, women, young people in particular. And that's taking place, which I think is a very important step forward. At the same time, what the Democratic Party has done, and we're talking about voter suppression, their silence is deafening, actually, because certainly they can turn to the Republican Party in the various states and cities that have ushered gerrymandering, have ushered the voter suppression, but they have allowed the chipping away of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, particularly Clause 4 and Clause 5, which allowed those states with a known record and history of not just voter suppression, but of racial terror, in those states, particularly in the South. And so we believe strongly that any time that you have a strategy to use the Democratic Party as your instrument to raise your demands, that it is, I like to say, it's not just the graveyard, it is the mortician, is the grave digger, and then the graveyard. Because you're setting yourself up almost for political failure in the end, because the corporate interest of the party is the dominant feature of the party. And in fact, AOC, the squad, to which we think they certainly can do more than what they've done. In fact, we saw that in the question of the fight for 15 on the national level, Medicare for all, particularly in the face of this profound and horrendous and disastrous pandemic that has taken the lives of thousands to millions of people in the United States, certainly globally as well, and not fighting on those issues in a very systematic way. And so in some ways, I think if we had our own political formation, if we had 1,000 Kshama Sawants, not just in city council, but throughout the nation, on multiple fronts, we will be organizing to put pressure upon Congress, on the White House, putting more greater pressure and saying the only way you're going to get you whatever you want in this world, and this history has shown this, is social movements. You don't get the Civil Rights Act. You don't get the Voting Rights Act. You don't get Clause 4. You don't get LGBTQIA plus rights if you don't struggle, if you don't fight, if you don't go by their rules. And in some ways, the squad is working still within the confines of the Democratic Party. They're looking over their shoulder and they're looking over the other shoulder. But what they're not doing is having a dialogue with ordinary working people. And so they come back and they go, oh, I'm frustrated. They don't listen to us. Pelosi, Schumer, they don't care. Okay, but this is what you're faced with. This is what you have. And now you have to deal with the consequences of that. But we want them to fight. We need them to fight. They have a platform far more bigger than Socialist Alternative, certainly bigger than Kshama. But Kshama has shown with that one single seat in Seattle, Washington, on a local level, regional and national level, that when Kshama speaks and Social Alternative moves and a movement builds around it, we can transform. We can win things, actually, for working people. It's possible, but we have to believe we can do that, actually.
Agreed. Brian?
Yeah, just, the question, should AOC, should Bernie, should they have run it as independents? I think the answer is yes. Algier, actually, when people didn't know who AOC was outside of Queens and the Bronx back in 2018, Algier debated AOC about this very question, and I wish we'd gotten it on tape because he really had her. And she had a hard time explaining why she was running as a Democrat, and it was through these pragmatic type of arguments that I think all of us are used to, and I think that you'll want to deal with in the next segment on India Walton, and that shows the limitations of what's going on there. But I mean, I think all of us are disappointed with what the squad has done since they've gotten into office. I mean, Algier mentioned Medicare for All, 15, but also the movements that have taken place. Why haven't they amplified them? Why haven't they brought them forward? Why haven't they brought those demands out and made them more concrete? Why haven't they used their positions to call action, right? A lot of well-meaning people, when they get elected, they're like, yeah, I'll really listen to the movements and the movements will push me. And I've got my ear to the ground to all the activists of where I came from. That's all well and good. You should be in office to push movements forward, to challenge misleaders in movements. You know, when the union leaders are telling workers they should accept a bad deal, you should use your position to stand with the workers who are fighting against those union leaders in their own unions. When people aren't taking forward the struggles of the oppressed, they should be challenged, right? And I think that's something that Kshama does different, that unfortunately we haven't seen the squad be able to do. At the same time, as I think we need independent politics, we need a working class party. I mean, ultimately, we need a socialist revolution, and we shouldn't hide that to get votes. We say it openly. We also have to engage with people who are still going through that process, who don't fully understand things yet. So this is why, Algier was speaking on a platform with AOC, and why we were, door knocking for her in 2018, but saying to ordinary voters that that AOC should be running as an independent, et cetera. But I think what we need more of on the left is not just talking about how we can use the Democratic Party ballot line. How do we use the power of running as an independent to point the way forward for a mass working class party, not just an electoral formation, a working class party that's rooted in the workplaces, in the campuses, in the communities, and exemplary campaigns like Kshama's. We need a lot more of those, and we need them to be alongside popularizing in the movements that we need a mass working class party too.
Exactly. And I think that one of the things that I try to bring home here on this show is I tell my audience constantly how important local elections are. City council, mayor. I know, it's not a congressman or a congresswoman, and it's not a senator. But I've seen people, I'm in Boston, and I've seen people in Boston go into positions like city council and really make changes like in their community. Same thing with mayor. We just had a mayor race. Michelle Wu just won. And so I just feel like those are areas where you can implement and create more change. But also, I think it's important for people to realize that you can win running as a socialist, running as an independent. You don't have to go into one of the two-party systems.
Yep.
I want to
I'm from the Boston area originally too.
Are you really?
Yeah, and I'm very happy that Kendra Hicks won. I just wish she'd have said she was a socialist before her election night speech.
Me too. Me too. I met Kendra Hicks. She was actually one of the speakers we had for the Boston Medicare for All March. She's phenomenal. She's awesome. She does a lot of great things. The Traveler said the DNC said in court they can rig primaries in 17. Was not aware of that. Thanks so much for the super chat, The Traveler. I want to show this to everyone because I want to show people how they can help Kshama Sawant right now. We got to give as much attention to this as possible, you guys. Some people are not even talking about this. So you can go to sawantrecall.org. I'm going to put this in the chat. And you can donate.
Wait, that's the recall campaign. Hold on. It's shamasolidarity.org.
Oh, whoops. Hold on. See, this is why I need you guys here. Oh, here we go. Yep, here we go. So hopefully, all right, guys, I'm going to put this link into the chat. This is Kshama Sawant. Solidarity, stand with Kshama Sawant against the racist right-wing recall. This is really important, you guys. Pledge to vote no by December 7th, and you can donate here. So I'm going to put this in the chat as well. There you go. This is really important. We can't have them take someone like her out of office. It just, they try so many ways to stop progress in this country, I believe. And speaking of that, that takes me to my next story. And I want to get your opinion about this. We're going to go into India Walton. And the first thing I want to do, I want to play one of her campaign ads. So I'm going to share my screen. Because I got to tell you, when I heard about India Walton, I was, very much hyped for her. I was like, great, another socialist that's running. This is what we need. I did become a little skeptical when I heard that Chuck Schumer was endorsing her. I was like, what's the catch? What is going on here? But she said, as a lifelong Buffaloian, I didn't even know that was a thing. I've witnessed the tale of two cities, one side that had proper community resources and another side that was left behind. It's time we build a Buffalo that works for all of us, no matter what side of town you're in. Vote India Walton on November 2nd. And I'm going to go ahead and play this ad really quick. I'm going to mute my mic really quick, guys, so I don't get an echo.
Hi, I'm India Walton, and I'm the endorsed Democratic nominee for mayor of the city of Buffalo. As a lifelong Buffalonian, I've witnessed the tale of two cities. On one side, there's nicely paved streets, and on the other, there's potholes. On one side, there's a thriving business district, and on the other, dilapidated buildings. On one side, there's well-maintained sidewalks, while on the other side, there's debris and abandoned city-owned lots. We aren't two cities, we are one Buffalo. If you elect me into office, my administration will prioritize fixing streets and sidewalks, supporting minority-owned businesses, developing permanently affordable housing, remediating lead poisoning, and addressing the root cause of community violence. On November 2nd, we have an opportunity to build one Buffalo, the safe, healthy Buffalo we all need and deserve. Vote for me, India Walton, on the Democratic line. Paid for by Friends of India Walton.
So India's story, it's interesting because when I first heard about her campaign, she's running as a socialist. She won the primary, for those who don't know. And then they decided that they were going to try to remove the position of mayor from Buffalo. because there was a chance that she would get it. Completely ridiculous. And I believe, if I'm correct, she ran as a socialist, but through the Democratic Party.
Mhm.
I have my opinions about that. But she lost her race, and the gentleman that she ran against, he won through write-ins. And it just frustrating to me, because the number of times I've heard people say, oh, it's not worth writing in someone's name on the ballot. And he won that way. And I heard this same story come through about India Walton that came through about Nina Turner's campaign. Now they're saying that, oh, well, she had smear tactics against her. But we know this is going to happen, right? Like, we know that candidates are going to get smeared. That's just a part of the game. I want to hear you guys' opinion. What do you feel went wrong here for India Walton?
Well, I think certainly when the smear campaign started, first they used the classic welfare queen argument against her, to which she had an answer to around some fraudulent deposits from welfare that she received. Then she had a situation where they towed her car because of unpaid parking tickets. And so I think, in a nutshell, how to deal with that smear campaign, how to deal with basically very much the same elements of the right-wing recall that Kshama is faced with, was employed in Buffalo. And because of her background as a nurse, single mother, a Black woman, I think that was very powerful. It spoke certainly to the moment in a very serious way. But there are definitely corporate interests in Buffalo. Right now, the Buffalo Bills are going through this process of getting a new stadium, actually, and they're holding Buffalo, the city of Buffalo, hostage on this particular question. Also, I think how they framed the former mayor as well, tying him to Palladino, who had run for governor against Cuomo, I think, I want to say 2015, 2016, if my memory serves me right. And also the fact of this writing campaign from Brown, that in fact, before that, he attempted to set up his own party to allow him to run. And of course, threw that out for a la Cuomo again, that utilized that tactic as well a couple of years ago. And so there's a lot of things that I think took place within the campaign. Also, India had a new campaign manager as well. And I think they hedged the bets to prove to the public that she was a true blue Democrat, that she was not an interloper, that she wasn't different. She wasn't this democratic socialist. She wasn't the boogie man to worry about. And so that's why you look at that ad, it is generic as you can get it, almost as boring as you can get it. And I think it didn't speak to how she won the primary in the first place, by being bold, by being audacious, by claiming who she is as a socialist, as a nurse, as a working class person. Because I've heard her in other podcasts. It was absolutely fantastic, actually brilliant in many respects. You say, wow, where is she getting that kind of political education? Is she a part of a socialist organization? She's a member of DSA, from what I understand. But at the same time, it seemed that it was very organic, and also it flowed from her experience, right? Living in Buffalo, born and raised. And so that's something that I think is an ingredient that is missing, particularly when you run within the Democratic Party, because the endorsement by Schumer and by that ilk, they are expecting rewards from it. And also it speaks to what Brian talked about, the various splits inside the Democratic Party. There were those in New York State that did not support her. For example, the new governor, who's a centrist governor, did not support her, but Schumer came out in support. So I think there was a bit of pandering to the progressives in support of India, while at the same time there were other elements that were very clear that this is a danger, that if India Walton won, yeah, she may play ball with us, but there's no guarantees of that. But it's the same So for me, this smells very much like the Nina Turner situation as well, because you played the game. I remember there's a Nina Turner speaking at a church, and she does all the classic kind of stump speeches, and she did not distinguish herself as different than the corporate endorsed Democrat that she was running up against. In fact, in the very church that was supporting her opponent, in fact, and Nina was polling very well up to that very moment until the last few weeks of the campaign. This is the price you pay by running inside the Democratic Party, because you're going to have to pay the piper at some point. And unfortunately, will India learn the lessons of this? I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure. I hope so, because I think she can return back in some ways as an organizer and as a mobilizer. And the sick part about this, I'll stop on this, is the fact that it was a write-in campaign. And those things don't work a lot of times. So that tells me the full weight of the corporate establishment of the Democratic Party came down. The corporate and political elite of Buffalo came down and made it clear, we don't want you here. We don't want you, occupying City Hall.
Yeah, 100%. I'm going to share my screen really quick, and I want to show everybody the votes, because this really blew my mind, the fact that this many people had write-ins. So if everyone can see this here, if you see the chart, India Walton had 23,986 votes. But if you look at the second line here where it says write-in, 34,273 votes. And then there's uncounted mail-in, which is 3,410, but that won't make a difference in reference to who wins. But that many people wrote in Byron. This is the guy who won here. Brian, I want to get your take on this too.
Oh, thanks. So I think when we see India Walton's ad, you can see some really impressive things in, A Tale of Two Buffaloes. It's implicitly about class. It's about institutional racism. It's about the issues we want to take up. But then concretely on the program, there's something lacking there. There's a lot of important things I think we'd all support, cleaning up, potholes and all that. But I mean, Serena, you're in Boston, Algeria, you're in New York. I'm out here in Seattle. Rents are too high. Rent control. My God. Every candidate on the left needs to be screaming about rent control. It's popular. It just won out in St. Paul, a strong one. And then name the enemy, tax the rich. And you should name your enemy and your opponent too. Talk about who's behind your opponent. Hopefully they did that. Hopefully they exposed the opponent. But usually a lot of progressive Democrats shy away from it. They think it's dirty politics. It's not dirty. It's talking about the divisions that exist in society and who's behind our enemies and who's with us. And you can't be afraid to make your enemies angry, because you're already going to do that if you're fighting for working people. Might as well expose them fully. And then just this write-in stuff, like anytime, someone thinks about using a Democratic Party ballot line, it's like, well, you can't win if you don't use it. Well, India Walton won the Democratic primary and she still lost. And also, anytime some candidate on the left loses in the Democratic primary, like say Bernie in 2016 and 2020, you say, well, then you can't run as an independent because now you've been discredited because you lost the party primary. Well, this corporate Democrat lost the Democratic primary, and guess what? He won the general election, not with any politics any of us would sympathize with. But it shows that if you can build a force powerful enough, and we'd want to build something powerful in a different way, that can be overcome, and that the Democratic Party ballot line is no silver bullet. Now, just finally on Chuck Schumer's endorsement, and what I know is working on Kshama's campaigns out here. So we're proud that we polarize things within the Democratic Party. And a grassroots Democratic Party organization, the Legislative District Democrats, where people meet and there's union activists and community activists, they endorse Kshama. We would like if we could get some of the progressive Democrats elected officials to endorse Kshama, but on city council, none of them will. Never mind a corporate Democrat. Chuck Schumer. Like, this man is he the second most powerful Democrat in the whole country, third most powerful Democrat in the whole country? That is just absurd. You are doing something wrong. And in that ad, talking about I'm the Democrat, that's how I'm going to win. It's like pretending things aren't polarized and tacking to the center. Like, things are polarized whether you want them to be or not. Objective reality is polarized in this country right now. Lean into it and take a side, and don't pretend to be in the middle, because there's nothing there in the middle to be won. And then just a final point that hasn't come up, and I haven't read a ton about this, but I just saw a journalist who I've read before say about Buffalo that a lot of the unions came in to support the write-in campaign against India Walton. The union leaderships came in and helped power it. And I think this is a mistake that the left makes a lot, is mistaking the union leadership for the unions. And my guess is what India Walton, so the construction union leaders in Seattle, they support the recall against Kshama. The construction union leaders wanted the cops to stay in the labor council. They're just awful. They're misleaders. But our top donors, one of the professions of our top donors, I think it's number 3 after teacher and someone who works in computers, because that's big out here, is construction workers. Like, we polarize the fact that the union leaders don't like us in the construction unions. And we have 20 union endorsements of union leaderships. But what powered those 20 union endorsements was that we have 600 rank and file workers who we oriented to sign up. I think India Walton, and I fear that this wasn't done enough, if the union leaders were supporting this write-in campaign, that the campaign should have then polarized within the unions themselves. Get workers to demand emergency meetings because they support India Walton, because they support what India Walton's saying about a tale of two buffaloes. And I think that I don't want to pretend to know a ton about the situation, but guessing from there being a Chuck Schumer endorsement in the fold, that wasn't done enough.
Speaking of that, the Traveler just said, I think Schumer knew his endorsement would kill Walton's campaign, and he's trying to cover himself on the left for re-election. And I wondered about that too. When I heard that he endorsed her, I was like, red flag. like what is this really about? And Bernard said Kshama is a soldier and is in the face-to-face fight under the eye of Sauron. Lord of the Rings reference there. Amazon intends to be masters of Seattle, and Kshama is in the way. Thanks so much for the super chat, Bernard. I wonder, I have to ask this question because I continue to see this, and it's obviously not working. But for whatever reason, some progressives, when they're running, they tend to believe that if they move closer to the center, that will help them win. I felt like I saw that with Nina Turner's campaign, her trying to move closer to the center. And me, if I'm a voter, if you're the left candidate and you're going to move further to the center, well, then I just might as well vote for the person who was already in the center. Does that, I don't know, does that, what's your opinion about that?
Elger, you like to talk.
Okay. You like to talk too, buddy. Yes, that does make sense. Actually, that you would vote for the candidate that's the center. But I think it's rooted in this idea of a calculation that I think India and Nina are approaching this. Is that, look, in 2012, when we ran Kshama against Frank Chop, we knew that it was a Herculean effort to put forward. But we knew that coming out of Occupy, we wanted to set a new kind of course, a new way of the left thinking about politics. And we said, you know what, we're going to do it. After Occupy ended, we put forward this idea of 200 Occupy candidates running throughout the country to amplify the demands, the ideas of what Occupy Wall Street embodied coming out of the economic crisis of 07, 08, right? And that did not happen. So we ran. And we ran in our most authentic selves, right? And we still garnered 20,000 votes. And for us to say that's 20,000 people that voted in a conscious way for an open socialist, an independent candidate, going up against the most powerful Democrat in Washington state. And to pull that off for us is a victory. And we use that as a platform to organize. The thing is that, like I said in the beginning, Kshama doesn't see her role within the struggle as this career politician or this career ladder builder. And what I'm about to say may seem like I'm casting aspersions against India and Nina, but I am going to put it out there that if you are about building movements, right? If you're about building kind of the potential social power of ordinary working people, almost damn the votes. If this is about a long struggle, then that means that whatever I garner in that poll, India got 23,000 votes for her. Now, what do we do on November 3rd? Now, do we sit back and say, well, the campaign is over, I'm at 12,000 votes in the hole. When they continue to finish counting the ballots, it's a basically done deal. She's already given her concession speech. In my mind, in SA's mind is, you know what? We're going to parlay that 23,000 and we're going to call town hall meetings in the community itself. We'll go to the citizens of Buffalo and say, you voted for me. Now, how do we, in fact, attack this idea of the tale of two cities? And how do we not just build this artificial fake unity one city, but deal with the fact that the corporate interest of Buffalo is controlling the city wholesale? And how do we garner a kind of movement and struggle to make sure there is a demand to tax the rich, to tax the Buffalo Bills, right, on their new stadium that they want so badly? How do we deal with the housing crisis? How we deal with the question of rent control, law enforcement, terror, on and on and on. And so if your concept is not that, this is an ideological question. This is a theoretical question that we're really posing to the Nina Turners and the India Waltons of the world, is that if you are about that work, then in fact, if you're going to move to the right, you think that's the winning strategy. Ryan said it correctly. In fact, all these demands are on the hearts and minds of ordinary working people. The problem is that people are not going to them and discussing it with them in a true way and say, hey, I need you to come on out. I need you to help me protest. I need you to help me do nonviolent civil disobedience. I need you to help me march on City Hall. I need you to help fight back against the Buffalo Bills in the building of a new stadium, trying to hold the city hostage. That will only increase gentrification, law enforcement, terror in communities of color and in working class communities.
Well said. Steve said Kshama is more than just a city council member. She's a national figure that can make a strong run for president of the United States. Do you think she would ever consider doing that?
I could ask her this weekend. Maybe we can get back to you and come on some other time. But
yeah.
One thing I think is worth keeping in mind here is we just see this happening over and over again, that candidates that come from movements, I mean, people we know, people we see in the streets, people we work alongside with, march on picket lines for years. We see them run for office, all the best intentions. And before they can even win, they start tacking to the center. Or if they get in, they start tacking to the center bit by bit by bit by bit. And I think it's all with good intentions. I think a question of why is Kshama not done that and why is Kshama different? One thing is she only takes the wage of an average worker and donates the rest back to social justice causes. She like strike funds, stuff like that, the socialist organization that we're a part of, etc. And I think that is an important mechanism for all candidates that we're running from the left, so that they have more in common with the rest of society, with the rest of us, than they do with the other people that they're sitting down with in City Hall. And the other thing is an organization with a program. Now, DSA is an organization with a program that's run a lot of people for office, but they need better instruments to keep the people that get into office accountable, right? Like, Jamal Bowman is tweeting about Colin Powell, AOC with the dress, in Socialist Alternative, Kshama's part of the leadership. She goes to meetings every week to discuss these things out with other people who are elected to be part of the leadership. Where's the connection there between the working class activists and the folks who are elected? I think that's something DSA needs to get better at, but I think it's something that's posed to all our movements because, a lot of people ran coming out of 2020 with Black Lives Matter banners on their leaflets, all that. But how accountable are they? A lot of union activists come out of the labor movement and then run for office. But how accountable are they? And I think that is related to a question of program, what demands do we put forward, but also a question of organization.
I agree. I think that Jamal Bowman recently was just asking people for money on Twitter too, and I'm like, you're asking us for money right now? Like, I'm like, come on now. We need this Build Back Better thing to actually improve. A lot of things were taken out, so I'm like, why would you ask people for money right now? But I think that when looking at this, to your point, Algier, something I've noticed, it seems like every year people want to do these movements, but they feel like the only way of doing it is through electoral politics or attach it to a campaign. And I'm a part of the Fred Hampton Leftist Network, and we are encouraging people to go out and do some of these things yourselves and stop relying on, a politician or thinking you have to do it through the Democratic Party or through the Republican Party. Some of these things like mutual aid, which we advocate for. So we have Rome goes across the country. He's doing a tour for the poor. Affinity has a mutual aid group in DC, actually getting out and getting involved in helping your communities. And when we tell this to some people, they're like, wow, like, why didn't we think of that? And I think we have been programmed to believe that the only way to help is to do it through electoral politics.
Yeah, I think the historical umbilical cord has been cut from the standpoint of understanding how social movements develop. Elections are just one part of the potential platform that you can use to amplify your demands, to amplify your particular struggle that you're fighting on. I think we have lost some of that tradition. Some of it has been lost in the labor movement, certainly, although we've seen an uptick of struggle by rank and file workers on some key contracts of recently, like John Deere, the workers in Hollywood, their contract has been discussed and be voted on very soon. So there's been a number of key struggles that's taken place. We saw Bessemer in Alabama around the question of Amazon. And so we have to reignite and reimagine actually what it means to organize and not just see ourselves as activists. And what I like to use a term sometimes is that kind of kitchen table organizing, to go into folks' home and talk about the issues for what they are at that moment and how to get people involved. And that's not sexy, right? So we're use of the social media. Social media has its place, certainly. But I think we're coming to a moment now where we have to say, we have to get back into that one-on-one. Now, COVID messes that up a little bit, certainly. But still, as we do in Seattle around the recall campaign, fighting back against it, setting up tables, knocking on doors, speaking to the residents, reminding them of the record of Kshama and what Kshama has done, what Social Alternative has done. Also, the fact, and Eric is right? The question of big money is involved in that. So we think we've got to the point where we think, well, we need to echo, or we need to duplicate what the corporate elite does in their elections and their campaigns. And in fact, history is the greatest teacher. And that is what we have seen. And we have to remind ourselves, we have to once again restore some historical memory. And in fact, of how we won, all the things that we've won. And also how we've lost it as well, because what has happened is that we have lost the larger vision, that every reform that we receive, every reform that we win from this system, everything that we wrest from their hands, the ruling elite's hands, that's temporary, unless we are about that work, about saying we need a total radical redistribution of wealth. And that means a socialist transformation of society ultimately, because Jeff Bezos, Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, Elon Musk, on and on and on. They're always going to come back. They're always going to come back to take back what they were forced to give because of social movements. And that's why this right-wing recall is so dangerous, because it will set a precedent. And basically, all the progressives that you see in office today will be under threat if they have the audacity to get out of line and do some of the things that Zurhan Mudadi is doing here in New York, who's an assemblyman who stood with the taxi drivers who were being shafted, actually, by the city of New York. And we know what Uber and Lyft has done to that whole market. But he did something that I think will alienate him from the corporate Dems inside the state legislature here in New York. And that's a good thing, actually. I applaud him for that, because I think that's the kind of activism and organizing we need from public figures like himself, and what Kshama has done.
Yeah, shout out to Deha, who says at the state legislator level here in New York, DSA discipline is much better compared to federal office holders. Thanks so much, Deha. Yeah, I think that the last time I was in New York, actually, I was in a taxi with my husband, and the taxi driver like started freaking out. His medallion fell, or he thought he lost it. And my husband was just kind of like, wow, he really overreacted there. And I was like, I don't know. I've been told that those medallions are really expensive. And then we see the taxi drivers coming out about against this, now today. It's so much money to get those. And if you lose it, God forbid. But I think like seeing labor movements just pop up and people are continuing to strike in this country, I think it's very telling. I think it's long overdue. And there have been employees who have been taken advantage of, especially during the pandemic, working longer hours, not getting lunch breaks. That seems to be a running theme for whatever reason. Like after all the strikes I've heard of, people not getting lunch breaks or having like only 4 hours in between a shift. Mm-hmm. So what I've always, try to advocate for people is like, one way we can bond is over labor, and not, just put the red and the blue aside for a moment and bond over labor and think about how we're being exploited by capitalism in this country. And I think that's something we all have a lot in common. But I think that mainstream media keeps us focused on the divide between Republican and Democrat. Brian.
Okay. Forcing me to talk. You guys covered most of the points. Just one thing I wanted to go back to that I think is a great point that you raised, Sabrina, is like people too often, and even more and more on the left, just see politics as electoral politics. And that's sort of the way we've been programmed by U.S. capitalism. But I think this is an example of what we can do with an elected office, but even without. That down the street from me, there was a rent increase from a landlord who has 350 units, so probably about 1,000 people in it. It's overwhelmingly East African immigrants, so a lot of them face the threat of deportation, and that's another way we're sort of kept divided. And they reached out to Kshama's office, and they actually reached out to a progressive Democrat city councilor, but I won't say what that progressive Democrat did. And they said, we're ready to get organized. We're ready to fight back. Some of them were talking about rent strike, et cetera, because it was $100 a month rent increase, but also when repairs are not being made in any of the buildings, et cetera. So we organized a march, although a march where a lot of the folks are a lot older. So it was driving vans over and then a march to the landlord's house, an organizing meeting of 70 tenants. Some of them were talking about withholding rent, talking to each other across buildings. And the landlord just yesterday said, okay, well, we're not going to do the $100 rent increase. So we didn't call off the march today. It said, well, now we're marching for repairs, and I think that's a lot of the type of organizing that we need to do. One other reason I think a lot of people look too much towards elected officials is that they do have some power to set policy, right? And like if a big public school is being shut down, I can't mutual aid my way with my friends out of a public school being shut down, right? So how are we going to fight back against that? We need a voice for our movements in City Hall and all that sort of thing. So, I get the opportunity, the honor really, that not far from my neighborhood, I can door knock for a revolutionary socialist who's fighting for rent control, and everyone knows who she is, and I can use electoral politics to fight for rent control. Most people can't do that, right? But like in Pittsburgh, for instance, Socialist Alternative initiated a campaign called Stop the Station coming out of the uprising in 2020. Like, let's make this concrete. There was a police station that was going to be built at a time when there was a lot of people that agreed with the defund demand. Well, let's make it concrete. Let's not build this police station and use that money to build housing. You can door knock, you can do this organizing in working class areas, even if you don't have the opportunity and honor that I have to have Kshama being the city councilor representing a district that's just down the street from me, and that type of labor organizing that I think you were talking about so well, Sabrina.
Well said. Thank you so much, Deha. Medallions cost $850K, a manufactured crisis. I spent time on the Taxi Workers Alliance picket line doing mutual aid. All right. Shout out for mutual aid. My comrade and New York Assembly member Zoran was hunger striking with the workers. That is awesome. Great news. Thanks so much to hear. You mentioned defunding the police, and that takes me to our final story. Because now that Democrats have lost Virginia, which I predicted that was going to happen, and now that, India Walton has also lost, there's a lot of blame going around, like in mainstream media. It's everyone else's fault but the Democrats. And now Don Lemon is blaming leftists. I'm trying not to laugh. and defunding the police. It's everyone else's fault. Like, Democrats never want to own their own mistakes here. So I'm gonna go ahead and cue this up really quick. All right, here we go. Let me share my screen.
Defund the police was the dumbest thing slogan I'd ever heard. And if you don't, go back and look. I've always said defund the police was the dumbest thing slogan I'd ever heard. I don't care if you get mad, progressives, dumb. Activists, dumb. That was the worst. Whoever came up with that. Even Minneapolis, a city where George Floyd was murdered by a police officer, rejecting a ballot measure to overhaul police. But here we are, just days after Democrats got their clocks cleaned, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi saying that they have to do something.
Okay, so I want to get your take on that, because Don Lemon is blaming it on defunding the police. Other excuses I've heard: Democrats move too far to the left for the loss in Virginia. I don't believe any of those reasons. I think that Democrats I think they've lost the plot. I think they don't really understand what working class people want and need in this country. I think they try too much to go further to the right, actually, instead of going further to the left. That's just my take on it. I want to hear your take. Like, who is to blame for all of this? And is defunding the police, in your opinion, an issue as to why Democrats lost?
Well, Sabrina, I think you're right. They would never take the blame. That's what makes the Democratic Party a narcissist as well. They would never say it's their fault, nor would they be reflective of what is taking place. Their strategy, their electoral strategy, certainly was to once again garner the suburban, white, educated women's vote in the last election. They left the Trump supporters to Trump and the Republican Party. And the only person that had, I think, the strategy in the program that could speak to that milieu was Bernie Sanders, in fact, that he could create the bridge to have a discussion about where's this crisis coming from. It's coming from Wall Street. It's coming from big business. Why are you losing your farms? Why are you losing your homes? Why you've lost your jobs that have existed in your town for decades, generational jobs at that. And so the Democrats' electoral strategy certainly is about winning, but it's flying in the face of the fact that ordinary working people have certain demands. Now, it's a very eclectic question, right? Like, for example, I think the failure of defund as a demand, and certainly from activists, is the fact that activists did not have a dialogue with ordinary working people around the demand. Sometimes they weren't even clear around what they meant. Now, I think the demand is important because what the demand did, it was a step forward than the first iteration of BLM in 2014-15, because it started to talk about budgetary priorities. They started talking about the ravages of neoliberal capitalism and also then COVID-19 on communities of color and working class communities, on young people. But the problem is that even in the midst of the rebellion, the George Floyd rebellion, that the leadership that existed, many of them looking towards the Democratic Party. And once again, in the case of Minneapolis, thinking that Fry and the Minneapolis City Council will follow through on their demands without continuing the momentum and the struggle itself in an independent way. Because to win those kind of demands, you have to have a certain kind of short game, medium game, and long-term game in this. Because let's be clear what the police represents. The police is the arm. They are the security guards of capitalism. Their role is to protect the prestige, the property, and the profits of big business wholesale. And so when you're going to put demands like that, you got to be able to discuss and debate with ordinary working people. I mean, here in New York, we have a new mayor who will be inaugurated in January. He's a former cop. Around the country, there's been a refund movement being ushered in many, many cities and states because they were forced to give up certain concessions to the movement. They had to do different things in order to stave off any greater crisis by the movement. Don Lemon is wrong for the simple fact that he's doing what he's ripped the page out of the Democratic Party playbook, where you blame the progressives, you blame the activists, but he doesn't get to the heart of why the demand existed and the fact what is happening in the communities itself, right? From the standpoint of the loss of jobs, the loss of healthcare, the loss of key social and public spending that has been attacked for decades. Many of them led by who? Democratic Party city councils and mayors. In fact, they've ushered the neoliberal offensive against working people. Now, he's not going to say that, right? Because it's easier to go after the activists and the progressives. And certainly will not talk about defund in a way that talks about the greater crisis of capitalism. And so I think we need to discuss defund. And I think it needs to be a very panoramic view of what the defund demand represents from the standpoint of how do we take our movement and how do we, in fact, not just, there's also the demand as such, abolish the police as well. Ultimately, you can't abolish the police if you're not going to abolish capitalism. And I think we got to start from that political, theoretical, and ideological standpoint. So if that's our understanding, well, then goes back to the original question. Why are people running inside the Democratic Party, progressives? Why are people doing A, B, and C, and D? Why they're just continuing to say, well, we need to run elections. Why not see the need for the labor movement to have new leadership and to build true democratic unions where the rank and file have power, true power, right? Abolish billionaires as well. We would agree with that wholesale. So I know I'm going on, but I think we need to look at defund, and Don Lemon is doing what Don Lemon does. It's a fake wokeness, corporate wokeness that he ushers, and he will get applause and he will get people that defend that. But ultimately, he's not going to get to the heart of the matter of what's happening in the communities itself and why that demand resonated with some people. But ultimately, it didn't resonate enough because our movement hasn't been able to make the conversation lively and go to the people themselves. It's not enough to organize activists, but you got to take your demands to the people themselves and see what they say to you. And then you can organize and strategize around that.
Well said. Anarchist said the reality is Don Lemon doesn't care about poor Black people and never will because he's a millionaire now and he's turned his back on the entire Black community. That brings up a point, and I'm gonna get to you as well, Brian. That brings up a point that we talk about often on FHL, is that there's a class divide. So people who are wealthy, even though they may agree, yeah, I think everyone should have health care. Or yeah, I think, police brutality is a problem. It seems to me, this is the impression that I have gotten, even when it comes to the Black community. When I'm looking at people like Tyler Perry, Oprah, LeBron, it's like it seems like their wealth comes before the issues sometimes. And because they are wealthy, they may see these injustices that we have in this country, but they also know that because they have the money and they have the networking and they know the right people and they have power, if they get into a situation, they know that they can get themselves out of it. So it's almost like it's like they're class loyalists first and then they're Black second. Brian, I want to get your take on all of this.
Yeah, I think the Democrats lost because they haven't delivered. I mean, Biden told us he was going to give a $15 an hour minimum wage. He said he was going to get free community college. He's made, bigger promises than Democrats normally make. And there's just been nothing there, and I think people are disappointed. And that's why there's low turnout, especially among young people. I haven't looked into the Virginia elections to see the breakdown of who voted, but I'm guessing young people stayed home, and I'm guessing the poorer the district gets, the less people voted, right? And I think that's due to the disappointment. Just on Minneapolis and what was voted on, I think my Minneapolis comrades would be mad with me if I didn't bring it up. So this what was voted on was just calling the cops something else. It was just giving them a different name. And, it's one way that there's a progressive, in one way it's progressive that there's even a discussion about the role of the police and can we vote something so we don't have the same type of repressive force that there is, right? So it would have been good if that passed. But at the same time, this was not put forward as like, the police defend the oppressor and exploiter, and we need to get rid of the system in order to get rid of the police. That is not what was on the ballot. What was on the ballot was, well-meaning, well-intentioned, toothless, nice talk. It wasn't real. I think the defund demand was really important coming out of the uprising, that we could say something concrete as a next step. Jail the killer cops, yes. But then what can be done? What's a specific demand? The problem is, I think that the movement wasn't organized enough to bring it to that next level to say, defund the police by this much to fund this, right? And if we'd had campaigns all throughout the country, I think, the Black Lives Matter banner would be a lot stronger now, would be a lot more organized now. If there was, defund the cops by half, take away their militarized police, whatever, in order to fund affordable housing, this, that, or the other. So I don't think that's something that we should back down on. Then I think another question that doesn't come up enough is, why are the Democrats okay with losing? They act like they're really upset. I mean, in 2000, I'm old enough to remember. I know Algier was active at the time too. In 2000, the Democrats won an election and they let George Bush take office. And Al Gore was holding the gavel himself in order to rule that he should be president. And he didn't do it. They are okay with losing elections, no matter how much the talking heads pretend that they're so upset. And that's because of the class interests that they represent. They really liked this situation of Joe Manchin being the rotating villain and Kristen Sinema to block, whatever they had going on, because that is a situation they're much more comfortable being in than having a clear majority. And that's another reason why we need an alternative instead of this cycle that we're going through.
Agreed 100%. Roger Meadows is actually in New York, like you, Algier. He does co-op. So he says, support my company, Co-op Ride, Socialist Ride, hailing alternative to New York City, soon to spread nationwide. So he's talked about that often. We'll be meeting with Senator Salazar to talk about something to talk about starting a new New York agency, cooperative business admin, to replicate what U.S. Fed of Worker Co-ops does for WC. So we've been talking about that as well, having worker co-ops along with mutual aid. And I think, Brian, I think you're right. It's like sometimes there's these ideas and let's do this, let's accomplish this. But the piece that seems to be missing sometimes is, okay, great. What are you asking for? What are the demands? What do you want? What do you want the government to do? And sometimes that step just it's not taken, right? So I think sometimes just being a little bit more detailed can help and go a long way. We actually are doing a general strike summit this coming, not this weekend, but the next weekend. And we're going to be talking about all of those issues. Like how do you do a general strike? What is a worker co-op? What does it mean to be a part of a union? What does it mean to like stand in solidarity? Like how you can do a general strike safely? Do you live in a state that even allows you to strike? So we're going to go into all of that. We're going to have several like guests on to come on and talk about that as well. But I think one of the things that concerns me repeatedly with the Democratic Party and with mainstream media is they repeatedly are coming after activists, which is really disappointing. It's upsetting. I saw Kirsten Sinema do it as well. Activists that canvassed for her, and she didn't want to talk to them after they knocked on hundreds of doors for her. And I think what the Democratic Party is missing is that you cannot turn your back on the people who are on the ground, the people who have actually like helped canvass for you and are fighting for you, because especially young people, because they'll remember that. And when it's time for you to get reelected again, it's just falling. This is just the beginning. What happened in Virginia, just the beginning. What happened in Buffalo is just the beginning. I keep saying like 2022, Democrats are going to have a hard time. Come 2024, they're going to have a hard time because they're not doing anything for people.
I don't have anything to add to that.
That's perfect. No, totally agree. Totally agree.
So I think one of the points I try to drive home is that it's not the government that runs the country, it's corporations that run the company, because corporations run the government. So I'm really like trying to encourage people to really hit back at the corporations. And I know sometimes, depending on where you live, the town you may live in, Walmart may be the only employer in town. And there are towns like that in this country, especially like in rural America. And I think when you're in that situation, it's almost like you don't have an out, right? But one thing that we can do is when it comes to some of these membership subscriptions, do we have to have a Prime membership for Amazon? It's things like that. I think about how much money Jeff Bezos makes off of those subscriptions, those Prime memberships. So I feel like that's where we can start, like starting somewhere, and then just being there for each other and helping each other out. Because I've noticed during the pandemic, there were people that needed help. They needed people to go to the store and get groceries for them because they could not leave the house, or they couldn't afford Instacart. Instacart's so expensive. These are ways that we can help people within our community. And I think that when it comes to electoral politics on a national level, I think that we need to be, stronger with our vote. And I advocate for people to vote for third parties, independent candidates. I just want people to kind of wake up and not feel like they have to continue to vote for the Democratic Party because that's what they've always done.
I think you're raising important, vital points. I would add to that: how do we build our not just social movements, but how do we build the socialist movement in the United States? I think it's going to be very crucial. Certainly, the idea of a general strike, the last major general strike that we had in this nation, was 1946 in Oakland, California. And in the midst of that, this is at the height of the socialist movement, Communist Party, Socialist Workers Party, the great strike of 1934 in Minneapolis, the Teamsters strike that set the world on fire. And the backbone of those struggles were socialists involved in that. And in some ways, if our social movements in our struggles are really going to be successful and garner some victories, or even being engaged in those struggles, forcing the ruling elite to concede when they want to say, a great quote from Walter Luther that Dr. King would always talk about, I'll paraphrase, but your power is making the boss say yes when they want to say no to you. And in some ways, we have to remind ourselves of that. And I think it's been a long time since we've had those type of struggles. And I think the socialist movement can play a very vital role in that. DSA is the largest socialist formation in the United States. They have over 100 elected officials around the country. Socialist Alternative, a few thousand members, one city council seat. But if you look how we organize, how we mobilize, how we use history, how we learn from history, how we draw out political perspectives, Kshama's first 6 months in office, she helped to garner the first $15 minimum wage victory in Seattle, Washington, that started a cascade around the country. Then in San Francisco, that got a stronger 15 because of the role of the labor movement in San Francisco and their role in that struggle. And so in some ways, how we build our socialist movement, how we can resuscitate in many ways the legacy of Eugene Debs, resuscitate the legacy of the great strikes of the 1930s and 40s, the role that the socialists and communists played in rent strikes, right? Facing off, linking the question of fighting against racism and workers' rights in the South, right? These are things that I think is much different. Socialism and the ideas of socialism, or calling yourself a socialist, is not the boogeyman. It's not the scarlet letter it once was, in fact, right? And that to me is a step forward, because the conditions under capitalism, you have a generation that all they know is environmental catastrophe. They know debt, personal and student debt. They know law enforcement terror. They know two parties that basically serve the interests of Wall Street. They know those things. And if you sit down and talk to them and ask them, they can tell you a lot of stories. And the pandemic is probably the greatest example of what we have lived through, in the sense of how sick a society that we live in. I'm a healthcare worker, and I was in ICU units with COVID-19 patients. And I saw the death and destruction that's taking place in the hospitals. I saw the lack of resources in our own hospital, a hospital that says it's #1 in the city and #7 in the country. But we are literally rationing PPE, right? We can't use certain, instruments or material. So that says to me that the ideas of socialism and the struggle for socialism is real. It cannot be compromised. And the socialist movement has a very important role to play, because we are the conscious of the conscious, right? We study history, but we look to change history. And so, I just wanted to add that to your excellent comments.
Thanks so much. Brian, anything else you want to add?
No, I've really enjoyed being on the show. Thanks so much for having us. And if folks can donate, KshamaSolidarity.org. That would be great. I mean, we're up against, it's literally going to be millions of dollars coming in to try and take out, the most prominent revolutionary socialist in elected office in this country. And we're all going to have to come together to try and defend this seat, which just isn't just a seat for the Seattle working class. It's a seat for the global working class and the left in this country, and especially those folks that want to see an alternative to the Democratic Party and want to see, solid working class campaigns run independently as a step forward towards that mass working class party that we all need.
Awesome, guys. Thanks so much for coming on. This has been awesome. Before you go, where can people find you?
You could Social Alternative New York City. We just published a new piece on Eric Adams, who's going to be the new mayor of New York City. And certainly a lot of the issues that we just talked about, it will be encapsulated in New York City politics. So just punch me, Google me. You'll find some of the stuff that we've done here in New York. And certainly the big thing that we're doing is working on the Kshama Sawant campaign. This is the highest priority for our organization, because we will continue our work, but the work is different when you have a powerful voice, a powerful presence within national and international politics.
Yeah, you can't find me a heck of a lot of places unless you're on a door in Kshama's district, and I'm knocking on your door nowadays. But really appreciate you having us on, and maybe afterwards, I'd enjoy coming back sometime if y'all are interested.
Awesome. Guys, thanks so much for coming on. Guys, again, just a reminder, next weekend, we are starting the General Strike Summit. It will be a 3-day event on FHL, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Other than that, I'll see everybody on Monday. Thanks so much for hanging out. You know how we do this, guys. Have a good night. Keep up the fight.